Thank you, Park. You weren't wrong, Mairead, about the lights. You're also right about the idea that it's a good time, I think, for politicians to turn off the Twitter machine. I'm going on holiday next week, and the one thing I'm really looking forward to doing is turning off my Twitter app, because I think this is a time, if ever there was a time for politicians and maybe for all of us, to have some quiet reflection on what's happened. Thank you very much for your very kind welcome. It's a real privilege to speak here at MacGill and to speak alongside this panel. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank Joe in particular for his invitation. Over the years, MacGill has embedded itself both as a national forum of reflection and equally as a forum which endeavours to stimulate political renewal. It is said that timing is everything in politics, and once more MacGill's timing is absolutely impeccable. The momentous events of the last few months are desperately in need of reflection and equally in need of a spirit and a determination to generate renewal. No better place to begin than Glenties. There is no easy starting point in attempting to explore the huge question as to whether the European project now faces disintegration or revival. The most familiar and frequent comment of recent weeks has been that there are many more questions than there are answers, and that is undoubtedly true. However, political leaders like myself must attempt to shape the circumstances of our present and future, no matter how heavy the fog of uncertainty. Before dealing with the aftermath and the continuing aftershocks of the Brexit referendum result here in Ireland, I'd like to speak initially about the broader lessons of the campaign's content and its culture. If we are to succeed in reviving the European community and its connections with our peoples, it is vital that we face up to these recent limitations. We should not be drawn into the complacency of believing that the detachment and disaffection which led to last month's result is solely an English problem. It is not. The uncomfortable truth is that the loss of purpose and passion of the European project and its ideals is a phenomenon that has engraved itself right across the European continent. There was a moment of particular clarity during the night of the Brexit referendum result, which I think gave insight into why there was such a drastic failure to passionately project the positive story and substance of the EU. At 10 o'clock on the 23rd of June, as the bells of Big Ben rang out over Parliament Square, the British establishment was collectively breathing a massive sigh of relief. They were of the firm belief that a narrow vote for Remain in the EU had been achieved. However, their confidence didn't stem from a comprehensive exit poll compiled across polling stations in every corner of the country. As shown on the TV coverage, the swagger came instead from the City of London. At 10 o'clock, sterling rose in value and worldwide stock exchanges were buoyant. The markets were happy, with votes still in their ballot boxes. They were betting that there was indeed a slim vote for Remain. All was well in the world. Fast forward to 2 a.m. as the results came rolling in from Sunderland and Stoke and even in prosperous Southampton. Things had changed and changed utterly. Yet again, the coverage didn't seek initial reaction in the form of political comment. A human voice was not the first port of call. Instead, attention was again drawn to the FTSE 100 predictor and to the currency exchanges. The graphs were plummeting downwards. The confidence of only a few hours beforehand had been shattered. The markets had again spoken. An English majority had voted to drag the UK out of the EU. Those moments of live media coverage that night are, I believe, a microcosm for the reasons behind the existential crisis being faced by all of us in political life. Is it any wonder that we face a growing alienation away from the political mainstream when the barometers we use to measure political and economic health are so alien to the majority of people's lived experiences? GDP growth, bond yields, or market fluctuations must not become the sole sphere through which we engage with political ideas and ideals. They must not take precedence over a broader and deeper political analysis as they did on the BBC and ITV and everywhere else that night. I'm not disputing the importance their importance to our market economy. I am merely questioning subservience to their absolute authority. Man does not live on macroeconomics alone. Those moments in the BBC showed us how far politics has allowed itself to stray. Far too often it has become abstract to the lives we lead. The voice of our politics must be more than just managerialism, be it economic or otherwise. It must speak to and for the quality of our lives and our expectations. It must be rooted in the rawness of reality. The failure of the Remain campaign was a failure to grasp these essential points. Too much of the European campaign in England, largely led by the former Chancellor George Osborne, was based on the bombardment of high-level economic information. It was an arid and remote vision of politics and of Europe. It was detached and distant from people's lives. It has to be said that this mirrored the very same failings of the European institutions themselves. The EU has in recent years struggled to find and articulate a positive relevance in the minds of its citizens. So whether emanating from reasons real or paranoid, the Brexit referendum result centred and hinged not on the supposed rationality of markets and economics, but rather on the feelings and sentiments of the electorate. The reach of the Remain campaign largely failed to extend to those feelings and sentiments. This gaping vacuity at the heart of the British government's campaign allowed the Leave side to manufacture a campaign which bore as little relation to truth as it did to reality. It is obvious that many of their arguments were entirely unrelated to the European institutions themselves. Many voted Leave because of the fabricated promise of a new Jerusalem. Ironically, this vote from many working-class areas of England and Wales was in lament to the demise of the satanic mills of industrialisation which William Blake had written all those years before. That deindustrialisation was much more a product of globalisation than it was a product of the European Union. On a more sinister level, some undoubtedly voted Leave for reasons marinated by a mixture of fear and blame. As has so often happened before, immigrants and refugees served as their scapegoats. A confluence of all these factors led to the Leave vote we now face. It also left the British establishment shaken to its core on the 24th of June. It is still struggling to recover. What they once thought unimaginable has come to pass. There are broader lessons here for those of us committed to the revival of a European sentiment, which again engenders meaning and carries relevance with its citizens. As I said before, alienation of the mainstream political offer exists right across the continent and is not simply contained within England. We would be foolish to ignore that on these shores some of that same culture has pervaded. I think the CSO did us all an inadvertent favour last week in releasing the revised growth figure rate of 26%. The absurdity of those figures made us all sit up for a moment and realise that statistical facts do not necessarily correspond with our reality. Sometimes ridicule manifests the most lasting realisations. As the great Brian Friel once said, the fact is a fiction. So from where can European revival emanate? If we are to reignite the European project, we must escape from the culture of a distant centralism which has ceaselessly enveloped modern political thinking. The dominant belief after the fall of the Berlin Wall was that communism had ultimately been defeated because of its inherent inhumanity and its inability to give freedom to the human spirit. However, what has become known as neoliberalism and its promotion of an unregulated market and its support for the insecurities of globalised labour has equally proven to run against the grain of our humanity. A renewal of the European vision is therefore badly needed. That must begin by reasserting the confidence of a middle ground grown weary from the constant and visceral attacks of the extremes. There has been much talk about the disintegration of the centre ground. It is not so much that the centre cannot hold, rather that we have lacked the courage to define what the centre can now represent. We must build a European vision which again gives voice to those values. Rather than the dry vision as played out month after month in Britain, we must instead return to the narratives which originally built and inspired European cooperation. Those values have paved the way for progress over the last 50 years. They have maintained the longest period of peace on this continent. They have asserted the rights of small nations in a world previously dominated by imperialism. They have spread and redistributed wealth and resource through investments in infrastructure, education, science and agriculture. These values have embedded, extended and embraced the rights of workers, the rights of women, the rights of minorities. They have ensured freedom of expression, religion and dissent. They have underpinned the pillars of our democracy. They have recognised and respected the importance of national identity and defended the right of self-determination. There is no arid vision to be found in those values. A return to those living ideals provides a rainforest of resource. John Hume taught us best how to reap the rewards of that harvest. It is what Europe once was and can be again. In the north of this island, we now face a battle to remain in Europe. Last Friday, the new British Prime Minister went to Edinburgh and stated that she is willing to listen to options on Scotland's future, including as part of the EU. What applies in Scotland would obviously have to apply to the north as well. 56% of our people voted to remain, unionists and nationalists alike. However, the following Monday, the new Secretary of State for Northern Ireland flew in, as they do, to say that it is difficult to see how Northern Ireland would stay in, and that we now need to move on. It appears obvious that message discipline isn't a strong point in the early days of this new British government. I am on record as saying that the SDLP will use every parliamentary, diplomatic and legal tool available to prevent Northern Ireland being dragged out of the EU against its will. The future chosen by the English people is not the future chosen by the Irish people, north or south. We have democratically chosen to remain as part of the European Union. No matter how often Theresa May repeats the mantra that Brexit means Brexit, we must strongly reply that consent means consent. We have not given our consent to change the constitutional make-up of the North. Therefore, our membership of Europe, the European Union, should not be altered. That is the principle enshrined in the Good Friday Agreement. It must be upheld and it must be respected. In the North, we opt to be part of the European Union, not part of its disintegration. That revival may very well lead to significant change in the future. Much of the headline talk at MacGill this week has focused on the prospect of a further constitutional change through the calling of a future border poll. That's a natural and welcome development. If the last few months have taught us anything, it is that political life can no longer afford to presume the permanence of anything. The SDLP as a party continues to believe that the reunification of Ireland is the biggest and best idea around. However, as the Brexit result and the demise of David Cameron has also taught us, we should make sure to fight referenda that we can actually win. Unlike Sinn Féin, we believe the cause of bringing about reunification will require much more thought and commitment than simply issuing a press release at 5 a.m. on the morning of the Brexit result calling for an immediate border referendum. Scottish independence campaigners produced a 670-page document outlining the path to independent nationhood and how it would operate. It was credible and it was detailed, and they still lost. Irish nationalism now needs to start on its page 1. Making reunification possible also requires the development of a progressive nationalism, which has the maturity to understand that a credible vision for unity will not be made in the image of any one political party. Irish nationalism must no longer be an idea to which we are merely born into. It must be about belief, not birth. It must be based on the practical, not the predetermined. It is a nationalism which believes that nationhood and identity is strengthened through cooperation and partnership. It is a nationalism confident and comfortable in its own skin, open to offering identity and belonging to all. From now on, that is what each Irish passport with its European stamp must represent. Each and every one will be a symbol of the nationalism chosen by this island and rejected by Brexiteers. It is that nationalism and that nationalism alone which is capable of building the broad consensus needed to shape the new Ireland before us. If we choose that future, if we choose those values, I am confident that we can spark revival and integration on this island and across Europe. Thank you very much.